So there ain't no easy way to say this, right? But you as white as the days are long.
Oh yeah.
You as white as the nut that brought me into this world.
Oh shit.
And at the same time, you in black people business more than the loss and prevention officer.
Yes.
More than Hassan Nabi himself.
You're gonna have to cut that last sentence out.
This is my OnlyForeigns, right? One problem though. I never made one. My big envy them woman them and man them. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been constipated? You ever been more backed up than the I-95? Well then, my friend, put down the Klepto and pick up your phone and read this message from one of my patrons. Where my phone? Alright. They can say, I want my money back. I tell them I'd be glad to refund them, right? But I was flabbergasted as to why they so aggressively, I talk in all caps. I wonder,
what did he do to make them that mad?
And listen here, you should hear the screams that I scrummed when they tell me why. $50 a month and you charge extra for dick pics? I couldn't find the words to reply to this yammed. I mean, they was chatting more than an Ice Spice concert. Like I was ready to put their message in Google Translate to make it make sense. I was ready to put one of them green diamonds over this head because they was beginning to sound like a sim. It's gender neutral, by the way. Okay? Carry on. So I finally muster up the testicular fortitude to respond to them. I apologize for your inconvenience and I'll gladly remit your funds. But I regret to inform you that there ain't no tear nowhere on the foreign land Patreon saying that I got free willy.
I'm dying.
Cause this you obviously slam dunking. They backwards into embalming fluid. This troglodyte gotta be topping off a jitney exhaust. But anyway, let me tell you the shame I felt when they send me a link to my OnlyFans. Nah, this wasn't no vanilla back page type of thing. This a race play OnlyFans. Yes, the same black man with a beard who do 2 videos detailing the problematic nature of the BBC and BNWO fetish has an OnlyFans dedicated to him. And I ain't gonna lie, it looked pretty convincing. They find the zestiest picture of me, name the page Bahamian BBC, like the name out there alone got me looking like the village bike that everybody getting a ride on. I look like the local BMX at your predominantly white institution. The description that say I accepted all snow bunnies, mud sharks, and coal burners. Well, mother fox hell. So the folks from the Foreign Land Discord already hip to this. I had 2 wolves in me. One say to get my community to mass report this page. But the other wolf saying that doing that got Barbara Streisand the thing and drive more traffic to the page. But then I realized that whoever made this page mess up. Cause I noticed a clue that would expose who been stealing my identity and scamming my community out of simoleons. I realized this particular picture they used was from a private stream on the Foreign Land Discord, which means that only a few select people would have had access to this. So I cross-referenced the day of that stream with the Patreons at that time. And I lessened the number down to about 30 members. One of these 30 people were making more money off of fake OnlyFans than I did off of Patreon. And that profoundly pissed me off, because if anybody can make money off this doggy, it could be me. Then it also occurred to me that this fake fans had to be advertised somewhere, right? Because how else it could get so many subscriptions? So I went back to the disgruntled patron and asked them how they found out about this page in the first place. Tell me why this child of God could say they heard about this fake fan page from me in the YouTube comment section. So let me get this gay, because I can't say let me get this straight, because this thing more crooked than Chicago. The inbred goat that made my page market it to people in my comment section by replying to the people's them comment with a link. I find the account in question, right? And to be honest, it was an admirable duplicate. I ain't gonna lie, I gotta get credit where it's due, because if you browse in the tube, bricked up, you could get got by the scam. So I looking at this fake foreign man in a foreign land account for clues to who could be behind it. Lo and behold, the location. Australia. And at that time, there were only 3 people in my Patreon from Australia. I immediately knew who did it. And if you were in the foreign land at that time, you know too. I privately DM'd them a screenshot of the fake fan page and tell them that the Digital Crimes Division of Australia could be at your door if you don't yuck this page down. Silence fill up this room. I could hear my own heartbeat waiting on a response. And then I see them type in. When that message come in, all I saw was a racist rampage full of self-reports that you would expect from your favorite conservative content farm. But no, this was a patron of a progressive, woke propagandist like myself. Among the many moments of clarity that this granted me, one rang raucously in my ears. My identity had been stolen. A narrative had been constructed in my honor and then animated independently of me. It looked like me, used my locution, and in the world of AI, probably spoke similar to me. And at that time, it made more money than my Patreon did. This was far from the first and definitely not the last time, as I've seen words and wrongs ascribed to me with impunity, to the point where the avatar of me supersedes me. I have not been robbed, but I have been stolen. And that is as much a part of the Black experience as cornbread and cocoa butter.
Louis Vuitton, stole it from Africa. Versace, stole it from Africa. The Washington Monument, stole it from Africa. They even stole some of us from Africa.
From integral inventions that, but for them, we would be dead, like peanuts, to customs that, had they not been started, we would have wished we were dead, such as the handshake. Black creations have been denied, much like the myth that we deny our children. But we don't need to peer through the rear view in order to apprehend an understanding of this social phenomenon. Because despite capitalism seemingly being extended to every and all people, as in even Black people can participate in the delusion of ownership, some animals are more equal than others. And that's most evident on the very medium you're probably watching me on right now, where the reality is that even the most well-intentioned folks of a fairer hue than me have an easier time understanding the Black experience from folks that aren't Black themselves. There are people, especially white audience, that will only engage with what you have to say, even if it's what I've had to say, but it's just coming out of your mouth.
There are going to be some white people, because of their own perspectives, that are biased due to their experience and their perception of their whiteness and what they feel akin to and comfortable with and what they can project themselves onto me, that are going to see me and they're like, yeah, I like that guy. I identify with that guy. I would like to, and I will continue to attribute, at least part of my success to the fact that I do what I do well and I worked hard for it. But the thing is, I can't deny the fact that, if I was, a woman, or if I was, a different race, would all these people be watching me to the degree that they are?
Blackness is synonymous with theft. Whether it be white supremacy seeing us as thieves, or, as is most applicable with today's topic, Blackness being the victim of thievery.
Charles Page turned his inspiration from a flying insect into an airship. It was about the same time that the Wright brothers were taking flight with their airplane. Page got a patent for his airship in 1906, before the Wright brothers. But Page's story takes an unusual turn. He planned to enter his airship in a competition for a $100,000 prize at the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis.
He took his life savings. He built a working model, tested it at his home in Pineville, and then shipped it off by train to St. Louis, Missouri, where he was going to fly the airplane in St. Louis, Missouri, and then become a chapter in all of our history books.
But the aircraft never arrived at the World's Fair.
His plane was destroyed or stolen, possibly due to the fact he was an African American.
I think that because he was a black man who had the audacity to try something that had never been done before is probably one of the reasons why the model disappeared and the history was never corrected to show that.
Extirpating us from our mother, the motherland, and implanting us in plantations, thieving our things, our labor. But in this case, I want to focus on how our face, how the very facade of blackness has been cosmetically botched as it bedizened corporations, content creators at whose continence is Caucasian, but whose verbiage, aesthetic, and expression is everything but.
Okay, so Rap TV, I worked inside that company for 6 months. I had a 6-month contract to be the director of their YouTube channel. If a company could be evil, Rap TV would be up there. The founder of Rap TV is an Israeli Zionist, genocide-supporting multimillionaire who has made his multi-millions making fun of black people in America. I think there's one black person in the company. It's like 50 employees.
There shouldn't be a hot take, but black people are arguably the only race positioned to have a culture cultivated by a color rather than other socio-political identifiers. Obligatory acknowledgement that white folks created race before some folks come in my comment about, why is it always about race with you guys? It wouldn't have to be. Trust me, I'm tired of talking about race myself. It wouldn't have to be had not white folks create whiteness. Yes, that's right. Whiteness, blackness, none of that is real until it was made real, and it was made real by white folks for white folks to consolidate political power and to justify the subjugation of folks who weren't white.
The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well. Right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped. because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks they got to keep these black people in line.
And while those who are considered white, as well as other races, have endured varying degrees of oppression, it would be irresponsible of me to deny the unique and profound subjugation of the African diaspora, which has resulted in a principle, a foundation of anti-blackness that is so universal. Many societies owe their flourishing to the exploitation of a black or black-adjacent class, especially in the West. Which is why black folks everywhere, Afro-Caribbean, African-American, Afro-everything, have a unique culture built in reaction to the universal anti-blackness that has been used to oppress them. That culture manifests in music, dance, food, storytelling, etc. We share a common history, oppression, and bond that has shaped the unique tapestry of our diasporic connection. And that alone makes us uniquely qualified to comprehend the nuance, growing pain, and the energy exerted to obtain recognition in the gate-kept genres of artistic expression. When someone divorced from these experiences gains notoriety or acclaim via the critique, analyses, or even exploitation of black culture and its purveyors, it's understandable that those same people will look at them with vitriol.
To a certain extent, there's obviously the colonizing problem, right? Which is that we all just want to colonize and oppress, and then when the people we colonize and oppress make great art, we just want to take it for ourselves and enjoy it while we're colonizing and oppressing, right? Like that's the general history. It's like we want to be a part of it, and I think that's the biggest problem. I think that white creators want to be a part, or white critics want to be a part of black culture. And if we're being ungenerous, we can say it's that, they want to be able to use the N-word. If we're being more generous, then they want to be invited to the cookout. But as the man you refer to, Unk, told me on a video a long time ago, I'm never invited to the cookout. And I need to understand that and accept that and keep talking about rap anyways. And I've been invited to the cookout, by the way, many times. And I know I am not invited. I know the truth,
Black culture is cool. It always has been. Even when the white ruling elite branded it as primitive due to their own identity. Our culture has always been synonymous with cool, since your great-great-great Grammy's ice chests contain a literal brick of ice. In fact, I challenge anyone to define any facet of cool in American culture that doesn't carry the blacksmith's mark of the African descendants who call the US their home. And I'd also argue that I ask my black American brethren what they define as cool, and quite often does the image of the Caribbean exoticism come to mind, but that's a discussion for another day about othering our own. We're forced to gaze at the gems we've effortlessly placed within the pop culture crown through a white lens. Black minstrels are a tool that historian Dale Cockrell recounts was skillfully used by working class white people who felt squeezed politically, economically, and socially from the top, but also from the bottom. To express the oppression that marked their unique position, having racial power as white people but lacking the financial resources to match the socioeconomic conditions to that of the wealthy white elites at the top of the food chain. This made them a part of the norm, but only to a certain extent. Just because I said that, though, doesn't mean that comedic executions of blackface, the type that most of us are familiar with, are in its own unique category. As the crux of minstrelsy is racial derision and bigotry, bastardizing the culture, deportment, jovial dispositions in spite of violence, mannerisms, and phenotypical traits of Africans, was a means to an end for minstrel performers, who subsequently codified whiteness itself across both socioeconomic and continental lines. Whiteness, therefore, is naturally antithetical to these illiterate, foolish Negroes who are only there for our entertainment.
the highest grossing films, or the films that get the most acclaim that are black films, are typically ones that are displaying blackness as close to the stereotype as possible.
Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave, which some might even categorize as kind of like trauma porn, but it's just so artfully done. The effort and talent and meticulous way that he makes his films, you can tell that what he's talking about is important to him, that he doesn't just want to fart something out for money, right?
Tyler Perry is an example of like new blaxploitation.
There's a huge difference between Steve McQueen films and Tyler Perry films. The most recent one I watched from Tyler Perry was Diary of a Mad Black Woman. I think that was the one. So much of what I've heard criticized in like the tropes of his films and like the heavy-handed, like super Christian overtones.
God is your everything. Don't you know he's a jealous God? He don't want no man before him.
Let's talk about commentary. The current landscape of the commentary community on YouTube is so white that I put my shades on every time I click on the new Curtis Corner, Danny Gonzalez, Drew Gooden. And I say this as a fan of those, by the way. And ergo, I'm part of the problem. The algorithm is the audience. And every time I consume the carnation cream of content, I choose not to click on the black, brown, olive, or even beige faces that may say the same thing. Therefore, we perpetuate the success of the folks that we will then complain about in a video just like this. But I'm a few chapters ahead because I'm not in the existential criticism of self part of the video yet. What I'm saying is that folks like Fantano or Vultures are the most ostensible resources to hear discussions about black culture, which overshadow folks like Sean C., Dead End Hip Hop, or even Nathan Zed. Your place in the scene on YouTube can obscure.
There is sort of, still a time economy to how much time and space I'm taking up as opposed to anybody else.
I started my film review channel in 2010. I was essentially helping create that space. I'm a white guy in the space of a bunch of other white people in this film criticism genre. I don't think that I am taking away time or space from other people as an individual, but then I look at the greater space that exists. I'm like, this is pretty white. And then I think, like, why is that?
All right, let's talk about minstrels. Minstrel shows were first performed in the 1830s of New York, using burnt cork and shoe polish to point fun at enslaved Africans and their now American descendants, characterizing them as slovenly and incapable of being socially useful on their owners' plantations.
Many early cartoon characters weren't just like minstrels. They were minstrels, with black bodies and faces with big white lips and eyes. And they aped the classic minstrel show, with big opening musical numbers and slapstick send-ups of well-known plays and stories. By the 1930s, live minstrel shows were on their way out, and their expression in cartoons became more self-conscious. Mickey Mouse had to literally black up to perform a minstrel send-up of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Long after the classic minstrel show faded from view, its vestiges remained in animation, even today. Take, for example, the white gloves worn by so many cartoon characters. That was an essential part of the minstrel costume, likely taken from the formal wear of slaves. And now, Nintendo portrays the white glove as a god of the cartoon universe, the ironically named Master Hand.
Jim Crow, the first popular character, was carefully crafted by Thomas Dartmouth, Dottie Rice, considered the father of the act. 15 years later, Minstrelsy's popularity skyrocketed into a subsidiary of the entertainment industry with its own unique sets of catchy tunes, sheet music, costumes, and even stereotypical archetypes that interested performers could use to create their own problematic Negro. And if it sounds familiar, it's because it is. Minstrelsy never died. It pivoted into a cottage industry of sly coopery creators who do caricatures of black culture for the white gaze that are then reported on by white creators. Enter the blogs that are merely cogs in the machine that is the new plantation. Black folks do something outrageous to white folks white folks commodify it in a consumable package with bastardized black sense and deep-fried headlines, which other black folks will then engage with until they perform bait, so that those very white curators could bite in their content in hopes of getting famous off the exposure. I know it's a lot. Insert the meme with the guy showing all of the different things, but you get what I'm talking about.
Nowadays, you see like Rap TV, Say Cheese, Twitter accounts, TikTok users, YouTubers who are all like white, talking about like, what's Young Thug gonna do in the courtroom today?
During my political science undergrad, I had approximately 10 white colleagues come up to me with a thesis that I paraphrase: the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Thankfully, even I, fresh off the boat foreign, knew better than that. But there was an effort early on from my white colleagues to launder the image of the South to me, the seemingly uninitiated black poli-sci guy. They hurled the Dixiecrat stories and never forgot to remind me how the Republican Party was the party of abolition, but failed to show the full frame of history.
Going into the 50s and 60s, race and the South returned to the forefront of national politics, with the civil rights movement attempting to end segregation and ensure blacks truly have the right to vote.
Do you think there is a real danger of the Republican Party becoming the white man's party in this country?
The civil rights debate isn't a purely partisan issue. It's more of a regional issue, with Northerners from both parties supporting it and Southerners from both parties opposing it.
I think this is a real danger, and I've talked with some Negro Republicans who are very concerned about this.
A massive switch-up takes place. Black voters, some of whom had already been shifting from the Republican Party, convert almost entirely to their new advocates, the Democrats.
I see trends and developments which will reveal that unless the liberals of the Republican Party take play a much more decisive role in leadership positions.
The white voters in the South, who had been staunch Democrats, start to really resent the big government interference here and in other matters like abortion rights and school prayer. Over the next 3 decades, whites in the South switch to the GOP, which makes the South an overwhelmingly Republican region. By the 1980s, the party begins to resemble the GOP we are familiar with today.
This will become a white man's party, and I think this would be tragic for the Republican Party as well as tragic for the nation.
That being said, we give the North an easy time, if I say so myself. New York's relevancy in this tale cannot be understated or ignored. White New Yorkers were absolutely pissed with black New Yorkers' freedom and independence, especially pertaining to art and music. When repeatedly mobbing black institutions and swindling free black people into being shipped and sold to southern plantations, the idea of black minstrelsy was then born by journalists who misrepresented black theater in their newspaper reviews to prove to be wider white society that African theater and its versatile forms, along with the performers themselves, were at the pinnacle of inadequacy. Mordecai Manuel Noor, who the local Freedom Journal dubbed being the black man's bitterest enemy, was an ardent supporter of slavery, writing that to emancipate the slaves would be to jeopardize the safety of the whole country. As a friend to James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and other prominent elite members of white society like John Adams, he wrote a poorly reviewed play called Fortress of Sorrento, which never showed at a white theater. When African Americans at the African Grove Theater decided to play his absolute stinker of a play, the man was aghast. He was furious that his work could be associated with people who he had on more occasions called eternal slaves, and raided the theater, declared it illegal, and denounced black Americans as being unfit to vote or have positions of authority in the United States.
In 1825, Mordecai Manuel Noah, a Jewish-American diplomat and one of the founding fathers of modern Zionism, bought around 10 square kilometers of land in the state of New York to found a settlement. The project was called the Jewish State of Ararat, in reference to Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark rested after the flood, according to the Bible. Located on Grand Island, close to the Canadian border, the colony was supposed to become a refuge for the Jews of all nations fleeing persecution. But the project met with failure. Arafat lacked support from the Jewish community, and Noah was accused of swindling money from European Jews. By the end of his life, Noah ended up supporting the idea of colonizing Palestine, and he refused to oppose slavery.
He made it his modus operandi to pursue other black theater companies, raiding theaters mid-performance, rallying thugs, groups consisting of white actors, to attack black actors and destroy costumes and sets. In his writings, he purposefully misrepresented black actors' enunciations and cadence, giving them the now traditional phonetic pronunciation we've heard today. Ever wondered why we started pronouncing river as ribber and brother instead of brother? While Mordecai continuously stomped black liberation and expressions of joy in an attempt to put black people at the lowest rung of the totem pole, he sought letters of support from his same white friends, Jefferson, Adams, etc., to implore white society and the United States to have more sympathy and understanding of the Jews. Despite this, Mordecai called himself inherently white. You being a white person reviewing hip-hop, which is inextricable from the black experience, how do you reconcile with that?
I think when a lot of people are talking about that I don't get hip hop or that I don't get certain things said on a record, what's really being communicated is that there are certain things being said that I don't necessarily feel because they don't come from my experience.
Not a very comfortable question, but the question is hip hop inextricable from the black experience?
I knew this question would come up, so I've been thinking about a proper answer for it.
And you could say yes, but you could also say that hip hop is a reflection of the American experience in a lot of ways, filtered through black people.
And I mean, that's valid. That's valid. That's a valid criticism. Hip hop is not alone in it being a style of music that comes from something or is born out of something that I have no personal experience with.
My real passion, since I was 10 years old, is music, and especially rap music, So I've taught a class on French hip hop for a decade now. I was like, well, why don't we just have a hip hop minor, and why don't I just teach it? Now I'm like, listen, I shouldn't be the guy who's teaching this, right? We should have a black teacher. So I go to the African American Studies department. I know those guys pretty well. And I'm like, so I think we should do this. But the chair of the department's like, I don't like that mess. I like gospel.
I love that. Keep on going.
If you want to teach it, go ahead. If you want to deal with it, go ahead. I love teaching this stuff. And I feel that teaching rap music in particular is one of the easiest ways to illustrate the history of America, especially the last 50 years. When I say that hip hop is the most important art movement in world history, I'm not joking. I have an undergrad degree in art history, and I'm a professor, and I do all that. I really, really mean it. And we're not teaching it. It's not really being taught. I teach Future, I teach Lil Baby, I teach all the stuff that guys my age are what is this? Because that's the culture,
I'm now picturing you breaking down DS2, the level of respectability politics associated with what is academia. This art form ought be taken with the same level of severity and gravity that we teach the classics with. Mad Villainy, yeah, for sure. Nas's Illmatic, why isn't that regarded, especially in American history and in canon, the same way that one would read Dracula as a queer novel? Which is why we ought be very skeptical of the down white ally. You know who I'm talking about. Your Tommy Egans, your Wansler twins, the very folks that are at the Floyd rally and got BLM in the bio, can be just as bad, if not worse, than their conservative counterparts that we clamor about. Yet the black experience has this yearning for white approval and affection, and many of us are overjoyed to see white folks perform blackness. We laud a Timberlake or a Tick for being white chocolate, but we loathe or look over black artists that do the same thing. Hence the rise of white students of black culture.
My goal is to build this program up to the point where I can hire somebody who can replace me. It would definitely be better if I didn't grow up in the suburbs of Massachusetts, if I was not part of the colonizing class, if my great ancestors didn't own slaves. They did, My step grandfather was a violent racist who probably screamed the N-word at Malcolm X in Boston in like 1940.
That's a nice resume right there.
Now my dad also was friends with like Henry Louis Gates and stuff like that. And anyways, I have a whole very complicated history that goes on there. Stokely Carmichael was the babysitter for my cousins.
I hope you're joking. Like, this isn't real, right?
No, it's all real. It's all real. If our kids listen to trap and they don't understand that trap music is a result of Reagan's policies in the 80s, the American desire to prioritize free market capitalism over general well-being, like, I can teach that. I teach, my classes fill 35 students every single time I teach. I can get 35 kids to sit there, trapping out the bands with the bars on the windows. They listen to that song, and then if you actually teach them the context, they walk away and they're like, that's a good song, and this is the voice of the voiceless, and it's repetitive and it's silly, but that's the truth of America. Like, the truth of America is the crack wars, is the crack epidemic.
I've gone on record plenty of times talking about the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. The former is Juneteenth flavored ice cream, and the latter is, well, stay tuned. There's no better allegory for this concept than the rise of Trap Lore Ross.
King Von had a reputation in Chicago as a fearless killer before he'd even started rapping, and it's widely believed, based on the statements he made in his own songs, that Von himself could have killed as many as 7 people in his career as a gangbanger.
It's definitely getting zesty. I feel like 6ix9ine, as somebody that snitched on his gang to like save himself, he was always quite eager to like turn on his friends for money. He's probably someone I could see going gay for pay. If he's getting a lot of likes and a lot of traction on the gay thing, I could see him just keep going down that path. YNW Melly. He's had murder on his mind since 2018. Bold claim that's been made is that actually Fredo Bang apparently was literally the dude that picked Melly up after the shooting, so that's kind of pretty spicy.
It's like if Patrick CC and DJ Cacademics had a baby. That's what Trap Lore Ross is.
Trap Lore Ross specifically, I find very interesting.
There isn't like a way that a normal average guy from a small seaside town in England should want to do that.
And then he shot him. He was 16 years old and he was 15 years old and he bled out on this
But how different is Ross from folks far more revered in the black community like Vlad TV, who built a career off the backs of black rap tea and sundry? And he ain't even the first to do it, nor the best, because folks like Adam22 been making millions, all from the corner chair of the hotel room where he pulls the strings of every situation, whether it be having Jason Love renovate his wife's organs or the countless vignettes of blackness that he's exploited under the guise of the white guy that just loves black people's business.
I didn't know that we were going to get off on a wrong foot there.
You whack 100, right?
Yeah.
Messing with me, you're going to be whack 99.
Well, who are you?
You don't know who I am, boy?
No, who are you? Don't boy me again. I'm asking you. Now, Adam, you brought him in here, so I
didn't know this energy was going to be.
I don't know him. Well, what's up?
Everything is not down, boy.
Hey, yo, Devin, step outside.
I didn't know this was going to.
Yo, bro, I'ma ask you one time out of respect to this platform. Chill out, bro. Adam, listen.
I think he's just having an off day.
No, who are you, bro?
There's a cottage industry of folks that I can't even cover because of how irresponsible it would be. Like, Hello Asinine or whatever the hell their name is.
I see more black commenters in here than in my show.
Like, Adam22 has made fun of me a bunch on his show. It's funny because I'm just like him, except I don't have sex with 17-year-olds. Like, we're kind of the same. There's not a big difference between us. It's just, I just don't do statutory.
It's hard when you talk to white people who are trying to be allies, because the people that we despise the most are white people who are not allies. And it's because we are afraid that that's who we really are deep down. I'm going to say a bunch of bad stuff about Trap Lore Ross because I am still profiting off of Black Pain and Black Death when I review, I don't know, any trap artist, right?
It's kind of hard for me to kind of go in there and say anything or hate, because the thing is, what am I going to do? Am I going to tell a black audience of people like not to enjoy his stuff or whatever? But, you know, you're right. There is a valid perspective that you're bringing and other Black creators are bringing, who are actually like kind of looking at this and thinking of the framing of it and thinking about like the wider implications and being like, well, like, sure, you can look at this one video that he's done that's like very well researched and be like, okay, you did that well. You know, technically it's a good video and it, you know, tells an accurate story to whatever. But when you look at the entire body of work, your focus is very narrow and you're kind of only, you know, telling us just like one single chapter of kind of the culture of hip hop in a very sort of limited way and delivering it in a manner that is very kind of salacious.
Trap Lord Ross, it's kind of the same thing. I'm a lot like him. I just don't act that way. No one would have an issue with him if he didn't act that way.
But Trap Lord Ross is making like King Von is a serial killer videos. You're not making that shit, like, to be real.
It's sensationalizing Black pain, Black death, and there's a sort of glee that he seems to take in the amount of death. And there is a direct correlation between the amount of Black pain and misery and poverty and death and his paycheck. When there's a direct line between those things, you probably have to revisit what you're doing or do it in a different way.
You could say guys like DJ Academics are taking advantage of that as well, because he's not coming on camera to talk about the quality of the music a lot of the time. He's coming on camera to be like, this guy said this guy did that.
And a lot of Black folks have a problem with DJ Academics too, just for the record.
I think he personally knows and understands that there's a whole wide world out there of, you know, Black music and Black expression and so on and so forth that is beyond, you know, the stuff that he covers and the stuff that he talks about. But what I don't necessarily think he understands is that, you know, you might be a window for a white person into that world, and if they're only being exposed to that, then that's going to be their perception just by virtue of that sort of like narrow coverage style. And you have to be like, you know, aware of that.
To be a little bit personal, I had always wanted to go to law school. And when it came time to do the college applications, I didn't have enough money to put the applications in because the fees were like $80 or $100 or whatever it was. So I didn't have enough money to apply to more than like 3 universities. And I ended up not even finishing high school. But I wonder if I had not been in those scenarios with all of the urban problems in my life that stopped me from doing those things I wanted to do, would I have gone down a different path? I think the answer is yes. I've made the most of it, but my ultimate goal in life was not to be a YouTuber talking about music. I wonder what has to be wrong with you to have all the advantages in the world and still want to do what I'm doing right now.
The ability to tap into our reptilian desire to dehumanize anybody is what he trades on, but it's also the societal desire to dehumanize Black men that he's also tapping into, and I don't think he takes responsibility for it.
The presence of white folks like Adam 22 or Trap Lord Ross makes it difficult for white folks who are not making exploitative works of Blackness. There's a great deal of white people who are in community with Black people and have range of depictions of Blackness in their lives, thus can better communicate the Black experience in ways that aren't monolithic.
Being me, growing up in a city where people only associate it with Black people, not being raised by my dad, not finishing high school, not going to college, working as a janitor for years, where I had nowhere else to turn in culture, like locally or national culture, mainstream culture, except to hip hop, because I didn't relate to or know anything else. Taylor Swift does not speak to me. You know, what else? Like Cage the Elephant does not speak to me. Like, it just doesn't speak to me.
White folks who share class solidarity with Black folks live in this in-between space of race and class, where they are ostracized by both groups. The white folks that don't associate with white folks who are in class with Black folks for racial reasons, and the Black folks who, although they see you in class with them or are subjugated to the same ills that they face, you're in the trenches with them, right? But they will still gatekeep the intimacy of their experience because of your whiteness.
If you can't accept that that distance, the inability to be invited to the cookout. If that's why you're doing it, then the mentality is still sort of colonial. It's still like wanting to be a part of the one thing you've been shut out of.
Me as a white person, knowing that I'm reviewing music based in or reflecting experiences from people different from me, knowing I have the audience that I do, I have to be aware of the fact that, like, for a lot of these people, I may be their window into this world. So I need to be careful about, like, what I'm exposing them to or what I'm saying is X or Y or Z, because I don't want them to come away with, like, the wrong opinion. If I was reviewing hip hop and all I was covering was, like, only the commercial stuff, only the most material stuff, only, like, the most mindless, only the most chart topping stuff, there might be a lot of people that come away from my stuff thinking, okay, that's rap.
Back to Mordecai. Just like dust, still we rise. Cause those same white readers who read his slanderous, intentional remarks ran to the theaters to hear the fascinatingly enthralling Negro speech. And when they didn't hear what they were looking for, well, they stayed. People who originally went to critique and mock the awful performers at Noah's behest remained to watch in awe as the black performers eloquently traversed the stage. Let this be a lesson for all the racists out there. I see you. Noah's misguided English counterpart and actor Charles Matthews enjoyed creating black caricatures by playing the socially inept Negro by using shoe polish to widen his lips, wearing ill-fitting clothes, and using all forms of dialect that he heard in passing. Like other white people in his time, or any time really, he wholeheartedly believed that this was an accurate depiction of how black Shakespeareans performed. And despite never visiting African theaters, upon his return to England, however, Matthews would falsely claim inspiration from the African company, supposedly reporting on his visits to the theater. The roots of minstrelsy lie solely in hate and jealousy of black resilience and art. Its found tendrils unfurling and spreading contagious spores into the open air, only to seep into the topsoil, leach into the water table, and linger in the bedrock of American entertainment industry. Cinema is a focal point of not only the American entertainment industry, but also entertainment and art universally. And the ability to critically engage with the art form is an art in itself. Surely there's plenty of talented critics that can discuss directors from an author's lens to the literal Ari lens it was shot on. But when discussing the content of the film, it begs the question if white folks can criticize and ethically and effectively engage with marginalized experiences.
I don't think there's anything unethical about me sharing my experience with a film, even if my experience can't necessarily capture every detail that someone else from a different community more closely related to the film might capture. If a film is made by someone who is queer or neurodivergent and it's really about that particular community and it's an experience from the writer, from the director that's like super personal, I think that people outside that community might get more out of the experience in terms of what they can learn from.
The perils of whiteness is that white folks have been defaulted to the point where they're rarely racialized. Many of them believe their experience to be the foundation or focal points to which other experiences are mere accompaniments, like a lead or rhythm guitar to the bass. Which is why many white folks find it performative or forced to center any experience but their own. Because when the privileged have been centered for so long, they don't see others being centered as normal. They see it as an attack.
Part of the reason why it was difficult for me to understand looking at Black Panther and being like, oh yeah, I see myself in that person to the black community, is because that's never happened to me with Iron Man either. You know, even a lot of gay movies that exist, a lot of queer movies, I never really see me.
This is in part due to the fear of retribution that gets alluded to in many different conservative circles, such as the Great Replacement theory, where pundits like Carlson would fearmonger a reality where white people are not the majority, and that the folks who were once minorities will do to them what white folks have historically done to us. Or even more existential is the 4 cycles of time where accelerationists believe that the world is cyclical, and they look for ways to hasten time in order to position themselves in a place of power when one cycle ends and another begins. All of these fallible theories are predicated on a world of realist politics, which, from an international relations standpoint, drawing from Hobbes in particular, see the world as nasty, brutish, and short, as well as see humans as acting in line with rational choice theory, which would purport that people would do whatever to better their own interests. All of which are juxtaposed to a classically liberal point of view that believes in the innate human desire to be social and to be altruistic with one another in community. Classical liberalism being far from what we understand today to be the liberal that we often mock, and more in relation to the political theory perspective like Locke. But why look to the white people them textbooks when we could gather similar understandings from an anthropological perspective? All of that to say, whiteness as a political construct is much in line with the realist political perspective, because of institutions like colonialism and imperialism that facilitated the settler colonial mindset. And this mindset that justifies the imperial West invading inhabited lands, wiping out cultures, and appropriating everything. There's a chance that that very mindset will be critically analyzing a black film like Black Panther. A question can be levied, therefore, on the qualms that come up in that analysis.
And I guess I misunderstood the public perception around that movie, thinking like, oh, what, this isn't like the first great movie directed by a black person. Like, I can name 10, like, come on, why haven't you been talking about my favorite directors? And so I kind of just got a little peeved by that, just being like, really, this is it? Like the Disney, like, you know, they don't care. They don't care about social issues. It's all just performative, right? But then I got a comment from someone that pretty much just like immediately clicked in my head. They were like, oh, okay, well, you'll notice that the films you recommended have black people in like impoverished kind of like, you know, either slavery or like ghetto circumstances, or like, I can understand like, oh, okay, there's a level of escapism there.
The only objective truth is everything is subjective, and the quickest way to overcome subjectivity is admitting it in the first place and controlling for it with a diversity of perspectives, much like a randomized controlled trial uses different tests to average an understanding of a scientific phenomenon.
This music is going to be one of the few points of exposure you have to any black voice, because you don't probably have a whole lot of them in your own personal life. Even for white people who know other black people, the fact that you do have these certain stereotypes and images in the media, they loom large and can still paint your view of black people or any group of people more than even the people in your actual life.
And then the white person puts that on to you, the black person that they actually know.
Like, there's no way to actually remove guilt. When you are white, there is no way to remove it. The same way that you can't remove oppression. Like, you cannot remove marginalization.
There are some points where I could get death threats from people saying that they're going to find where I live. Like, you're not going to see the end of this summer, bro. And like, you know, all this because I'm a culture vulture. And then sometimes it's like a well thought out criticism of me not having the right life experiences to say certain things. I've definitely been attacked by, what's his name? Tariq Nasheed.
That's interesting. Me too.
I don't search out my name on Twitter anymore because I'll get a lot of, I think for the most part, other white people who feel a negative reaction from seeing me do what I do. And I think they project themselves onto me. I get a lot of comments and tweets about me saying like, it's really amazing that your parents paid for your recording studio, that you can do this all the time. Or, you know, your English media studies degree is going a long way right now. Kind of these like trying to deride me for things that they themselves have.
Back when rock was blackity black, the talented fingers of the Queen of Rock, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, tickled the frets of a Les Paul custom guitar to make a G-string wiggle decades before a Tong song. Let me see that. How many know her name? I know my Grammy does, but she's black. I bet $1,000 that you will recognize one of the most prolific names that made money imitating her style, like the notorious groomer crooner himself, Elvis Presley. Sister Sharp was just one in a long line of black performers who had their entire style, from the unique timbre and timbre of their tones, to their style, and even their entire catalogs bitten by white artists to successfully enter the white music market. The blonde patter of Pat Boone often used the lofty lyrics of Little Richard.
If you're talking about Billy Woods, and you're talking about Makami, like you're talking about people who are operating at very high levels of lyricism and thought. There's a certain like class of rapper who are like children of academics. Like there's a lot of rappers like that, like Earl Sweatshirt, Billy Woods, Milo. Earl Sweatshirt's mom is one of the founders of critical race theory. Like her name is on the original document of critical race theory. His dad is this famous poet. Anyways, and when I talk about RXK Nephew, it's fascinating because I live in the city. I live in the Rochester area, and I live in a nice suburb that was redlined, and I have a nice amount of property, and it was designed to keep him, when he was a baby, out of my neighborhood. That's where I live. Like that's the goddamn reality of my life.
The inception of what is now referred to as hip-hop coincided with the American government's creation of the 1980s crack epidemic and the idiotic war on drugs, which people noted was racist in its sole focus on crack, a cheaper, more readily available alternative to the other major drugs of that time. Gangsta rap showed the world a different view than the traditional political expressive speech in the precluding and succeeding eras. The key rap groups around this time was NWA and was based upon one of their lyrics where they indicated that they were a gang, not to advocate disruptive behavior, but to say, hey, we're not a gimmick or a fad or a trend. NWA wanted to indicate that they were real people telling real stories about their art of storytelling, especially given that Eazy was the only one running game on the streets at that time. Governing bodies legislated harsher policies that incarcerated many, thereby purposefully affecting the lives of urban youths in the late 80s and 90s. The music of this era mirrored these stories and reversed the image of blacks as violent drug dealers. The genre specifically elaborated upon the trials and tribulations that is living in the hood during the crack epidemic, where the flames of white panic were stoked by the government to foster a conservative agenda, despite having a more liberal political environment wherein the social scientists should play a more active role. Rappers touched on how circumstances dictated that they had to carry weapons, gangbang, slang dope, sell coke, and police brutality. These MCs didn't advocate for doing these things, but merely explained the necessary evil in order to survive in an environment crafted to ensure that you wouldn't survive with a low job availability and purposefully scanty resources. Although these views reached a generation of whites like no other genre of black music before its time, the now diverse audience still didn't actually internalize those lyrics. It was just a fun, unique way of getting pumped. Conservative parents naturally created an uproar as their closed-minded sensibilities shattered with depictions of life from those people. Now within the cities, young urban youth are listening to music that speak of their troubles. The poetry of the streets feeds a fire in the soul that will keep them warm when the endless uphill chill of poverty leaves them without heat. This poetic expression is the only source of guidance many will ever have. So they cling to these beliefs, ideals, and representations of how life is. And maybe, just maybe, like the rappers they listen to, they too can create music.
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of the criticisms I get come from white people who see me in themselves and are confused. And so they automatically assume I'm doing something inauthentic. And I do understand that. Being white, like I have a lot of friends in small towns or suburbs, and I can go visit them sometimes, and I see the type of whiteness that I'm not normally used to. Like a lot of white people all in one place has a very different look than I'm used to. And I see how if I were from there, I probably wouldn't like me either.
I think there's a lot of white people that just don't necessarily want to put in the emotional and mental labor to sort of like change the minds of the people around them. Because oftentimes whiteness and white culture and the hierarchy that kind of reinforces it goes so unchallenged, there's not a whole lot of regular opportunity without coming across like, oh, you're just being preachy, you're just being annoying, why are you bringing this up again? There's not a whole lot of opportunities because those challenges don't often happen. White people who rightfully so, understand to some degree that like, the economically, politically, the world that we currently live in is like very and isn't necessarily like benefiting your average person. And the idea to process on top of that, in addition to this, you not doing too well in the world right now, there's also this other group of people who are doing even worse, and it's sort of they're sort of like suffering at your political and social hand in a way. It's like that's something that causes a lot of people to get defensive.
Public views on rap and hip-hop were critiqued through a racist white lens from its inception. Critics didn't want to remove the rose-colored glasses and considered other viewpoints from their own. Rappers, their supporters, and those who platformed them were portrayed as menacing black youth, with the music branded as encouraging violence and misogynistic rhetoric. Words like crack, gang, and guns became synonymous with urban living, which, as we all know by now, is really just a code for black. And given that the American media outlets are both an institution designed to inform the public and a business, their primary purpose was and will always be to make a profit, which means sometimes sensationalizing events. As a source of viable information and a propaganda machine, the media will always look for a scapegoat. Thus far, we have seen media rags and pundits blame video games and music for accurately depicting real-life violence. In other words, the crack crisis is partially the construction of associating a dangerous drug with a stereotypically dangerous class of people. Those who attempted to censor or ban rap music cited vulgarity and crude language as the most prominent excuse. Won't someone think of the precious white babies? Sounds very familiar to what we hear when they discuss trans rights. They're being exposed to Negroes and men in women's dresses. Everyone, and I mean everyone, from senators, councils, and PTA members, futilely tried to deconstruct and discredit a music genre based on fear. But when it comes time to black people, what's new? Young people within urban environments felt the ripples of their vitriol, given that rap was, and in many ways still is, the predominant artistic channel from and by urban society. When you hear people that you look up to discuss a lifestyle familiar to you, but heavily discouraged by those in positions of authority, you miss the context. Sometimes you don't immediately grasp the political racial undertones suggested by the music. These kids now want to be gangsters after all. Music morphed into a step-parent and nanny to the white middle to upper-class suburban kids. And well, we've all seen a video or two of a white kid completely disrespecting their parent in public. The second-hand embarrassment and thoughts of, I could never talk to my parents like that, is similar to how many black people feel when our art is co-opted and criticized by white reviewers who lack the cultural competency to grasp the nuance at play, leading us to asinine contradictions like MAGA rappers. The very fact that white entertainers will emulate black styles, belting out the blandest bars like the clammiest side of Ivory soap, while simultaneously vilifying minority inclusion as pandering and forced diversity, shows just how far removed the context a white fan can be.
A lot of the times, people misattribute something as being woke by just, oh, there's a person in it that's not white, or too many people in it that's not white, or there's a character in it that's gay, or there was a gay kid. Like,
taking a closer glance at every white boy's favorite rapper, Eminem, we see a consistently good ally of the culture. Despite what you may think of his newer work, he's always been on point, respected by his peers, similarly respecting of his peers, and immense talent and hard work to be respected by those same people. His lyrics indicate an understanding of black culture and his position within it, while he himself tends to boost black creatives. MacDonald, however, is an example of appropriation. no context, divorced from the culture, and repeatedly critical of the culture that you seek to profit from because it doesn't and never will fit your myopic narrative. Modern day exploitation is no different than it was a century ago. The news continues to sensationalize black bodies in art, sports, and the morgue. White voices telling black stories is still one of the biggest money makers in the entertainment industry. When the access point is a step removed, white people can feel safe in the physical and vocal tones that mirror their own. And while it is weird and racist, it's not the biggest issue when white critics with ill intentions are particularly prevalent and still have pull within the media sector. Vlad TV makes a mint off black stories and clickbait titles, almost all of which negatively depict whatever creator has the misfortune of going on his show. White TikTok star Charli D'Amelio pilfers all of her dance moves from black queers and femmes. When a black person challenges cultural appropriation, it is not a call for white people to divest from black culture, but to engage with compassion, empathy, and most importantly, a willingness to learn. In his seminal work, The Negro Artist and Racial Mountains, Langston Hughes essentially said that black artists in America should stop copying whites, that they will never create anything great that way. What I understood this to mean is that our experience will never be ours until we divorce ourselves from the white gaze. He said that in the 20s. Kendrick Lamar made To Pimp a Butterfly almost 100 years later, and the message of both works is still the same. We still shuck and jive for white eyes, for a paucity of pennies, myself included. It's important that we dissect and discuss how the black experience has been colored by the colorless. But it's just as important to understand our part in this industry. I eat off my trauma. I get a percentage of my pain. This ain't reparations either. No, this is labor. It's just getting a better return than my ancestors did in the fields. Marginalization is an industry of which bigots and I have a symbiotic relationship. Marginalized are positioned as antagonistic forces for the status quo and vice versa. We're all reacting. We're both the chicken and the egg simultaneously in some Kurt Vonnegut novel. The hero and the villains are clear depending on where your vantage point is. But what I find to be profoundly precarious of a situation to be in is for you, the true white ally, for lack of a better word. You are stateless. You live in a liminal space where you are ostracized by the folks you try to ally with and the bigots that see you as a traitor to your privilege.
If we are going to have a necessarily evil, a catch-22, I would like it to be someone that is empathetic enough and at least in community with black folks and has a particular lens, a political lens, that allows for that analysis to not be a superficial or a detrimental one of blackness.
You will never shed enough blood to warrant continence to the cookout. You will always be seen as a defector by the oppressors. If you ally the marginalized in order to be hip enough to gain access to the very terminal your privilege card declines at, then your pilgrimage is insincere and ultimately in vain. You must make peace with the pain of being in the liminal space of allyship. From comrades to colleagues, true allyship is rare to come by. I took the risk of creating a career of making content. I quickly became inured to the reality of relaying my lived experience and culminated education into something consumable for a majority white community. I love what we've fostered around this work, and I'm more proud of the folks that I see in the comments or in the Foreign Land Discord more than any video I've ever made, as they are testaments to the humanity of the world and our capacity to change. But then there's a dark side of this, such as the creators who exploit you through leaning on the historical bias of black bad in order to make you the villain in their story. There's also the financial side of this, which is arguably the most taxing, such as the fact that black creators get paid far less than their white counterparts, as do women and femmes get paid less than men in masks. There's also agencies that take advantage of the inchoate state that many marginalized creators operate from and make money off the backs of black YouTubers whilst also getting the added benefit of tokenizing them to deflect their own criticism. The more my channel grew, the more I encountered these agencies, and I had to practice discernment with them, as the majority of them are in the same business as we've detailed today in this video. But thankfully, that was not the case with my streaming service Nebula. Being a part of Nebula has been one of the main reasons I'm able to fight for the most marginalized as well as survive. And with a baby on the way, that's the reason why I'm here in the first place, I'm truly thankful for not only Nebula's support, but most importantly yours. You get to support me directly, as well as my colleagues like Big Joel and Lindsay Ellis, in an effort to make more prestigious and ambitious work that just won't work on YouTube, like Jetlag, a thrilling game show from Wendover Echo, playing tag across different countries. And this is the best time to get in on the goods, because you can get Nebula for life. I know some of you are tired of the subscriptionification of everything, so for a one-time purchase, you can get access to Nebula for as long as you and Nebula live, which goes directly to funding projects that you'd had a hand in building. I'm talking prestigious projects like The Ballad of John and Yoko by Lindsay Ellis, which goes into a musical relationship like we've never seen since. And it challenged me as well, because I had no idea the amount of misogyny that Yoko Ono went through. I can't recommend it enough, honestly. We also got Nebula subscriptions for as low as $2.50 a month. Netflix could never. So tap on my link in the description, nebula.tv/foreignman, to gain access to the smartest service in streaming, Nebula. And tap there to see some videos that I recommend more to understanding this topic. I can see you there.